recording right now. Jan, thank you so much for joining Success Corner. We're glad to have you.
Thanks. I was excited. We finally made it happen.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, would love to dive right in. And, I just mentioned in a brief introduction that you're part of the Success League. Would love to start by understanding your work there. And then I think that might be an offshoot into a lot of other conversations.
Yeah, sure. So Success League, I was in sort of a, what do you call it, solopreneur consultant, and was working with a lot of founders and early stage startups. And I kept, entrepreneurs are really passionate about what they are building. And so I kept getting more, going back to my roots, customer success with them and saying, let's stand on our heads. Let's think about the customer. What do they need here? What do you want to help them with? Anyway, so all this to say, when I started getting really involved in the customer success community, which I love, it's just such a great community. And it's primarily through Gain, Grow, Retain, Customer Success Leadership Network and LinkedIn that's kind of my world mostly of the CS community. I thought that what I would do is go and be a leader at a early stage startup like Seed or something like that and help them be customer centric, et cetera. And then was talking to Sherry Srebnick, and she introduced me to my current boss, Kristen Hayer. And I just found that there's such an amazing, it's a boutique customer success consultancy, but it's such an amazing, group of people who are experts in their field. And it's so exciting whenever you get the opportunity to sort of geek out about CS that I just was like, I found my people. And so why would I ever go and just go and do a full-time job at a startup if I could just be with my people all day? And so that's how I ended up joining Success League. Just about a year ago, just over a year ago. And it's been really great. We have a variety of different services. They're all very sort of modular. We have a very modular approach. So it's everything from public and private courses for CSMs or CS leaders, and you can do a whole certificate, or you can just drop in and take one of the classes. Those are live Zoom classes, so it's also a little different than what other people offer. We also do consulting services that are aligned with how we approach CS in our courses, and we'll do assessments of a CS program, or we can help new startups identify kind of how they should set up their CS program initially. We've done that before. And in fact, then we also do interim leadership. Oh, and coaching. We do coaching mostly of CS leaders, more so than really CSMs. But when we're doing the interim leadership for startups, which is I'm at now in 1 year, this is my second gig. It's funny because it is sort of what I would have done if I had gone to work directly for a startup, but we're also sort of taking those consulting skills. So every time I work as an interim leader, I'm also helping them build up their program. And in this case, even more recently, helped them hire pretty much a whole team. But yeah, so there's it's really fun for me. I really like it. I get to do a lot of different things and geek out about CS all day. But also I sort of talk about it as being sort of Johnny Appleseed, where I get to go from one company to the next and help them sort of reformulate and rethink how they want to approach CS. So
yeah, it's super interesting, I think, because a lot of professionals in the world of CS are probably coming into an established company and kind of dealing with a lot of the processes or lack of process that's already been put in place, and you're getting to come in at a slightly earlier stage. And so I wonder, especially for folks who are at slightly larger companies than what you're working with, if you have any learnings or takeaways that, because I always equate this idea of SimCity, you can start SimCity from scratch, or you can take it over just after the tornado hit the city. And I feel like a lot of CS is after the tornado.
In the tornado city.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I don't know what else to say about that. But yeah, I mean, well, that is, and that's why we do the assessment first, is to kind of go through and say, okay, so here are the things that you've built. These things are working well. Here are the things that you've built. Yeah, they could do some improvements, but they're not on fire. And then here are the things that either are missing completely that you should think about, or that are just not being utilized, but you have this idea of it, or you're, not using it correctly, and that's, to your detriment. And those are usually then the areas where we help them focus first. But frankly, there's also, just when you think about the fundamentals of customer success, like you have to really start to look first at segmentation. Have you segmented your customer base correctly? Is it really based upon how they're using their product, what their outcomes and end goals are? Because if you haven't done that, if you've only thought about it from your own perspective of ARR, like these are my most important and here's my least important, like that should guide how you deliver your customer journey. But what that customer journey is, which is why you do a segmentation in the first place, it needs to be based around what is that customer journey going towards? What are those highs? What are those experiences that you need to measure in terms of where they should be in the life cycle? And if they're using your product differently, if they have different end goals, then then that's how you know that they should be in different segments. And you could even technically, and it's not often, but you could have different ARRs, different levels of customers in the same customer journey, and you could deliver that journey differently to them, right? In terms of more digitally or more, with hands-on with humans. But it's really about what is that customer journey. That's where you do the customer segmentation. And that's usually where we have to start, because so many companies don't think about it from the customer perspective. They think about it only in terms of what their goals are.
And so that's really interesting as a kind of a litmus test for the health of a CS organization.
Yep.
Like if you're coming in, and we have some folks in the chat who said they're relatively new to CS or trying to get into CS. It might be a good first interview question of like, have you segmented your client population? As a basically like, do I want to work here?
Well, but everyone's going to say yes to that. They're all going to say, oh yeah, we have our segments. And but then talking about like, so what's the difference between them? And then that's when you really discover, like, it's funny, this week I've been posting about discovery questions, and that's really important even when you're in an interview, because if you ask them, have you segmented your customer base, everyone will tell you yes. But then if you don't follow up on that and say, well, tell me more about that, how did you segment them? How do you know that that's the best way to segment them? That's when you find out, did they really segment their customer base?
So are there other litmus tests? Like if you're coming into a client or approaching any company and trying to assess their CS health, are there any other things that are big indicators for you?
Well, I mean, the way that we go about doing those assessments is we, talk to usually about like 30 different people that are on the go-to-market side and a few others within the organization to really kind of dig in. There's a lot of, everybody's a snowflake in terms of how they can mess up the delivery to the customer. But we're all trying, I think sometimes what happens though is you build a process off of how things used to work, as opposed to then how things have changed, or out of necessity, where you are building processes based upon just past capabilities versus thinking about what should I really be building as future capabilities.
And then that gets into one of the things we wanted to talk about too, which is when's the right time to implement a CS tool. I feel like maybe a lot of companies get over their skis, get the tool in place before they actually know what the processes ought to be.
Yeah, I mean, and frankly, they'll pay for a CS tool and they can't even use it yet, because the CS tool is not the solution. The CS tool is a tool, that's it. And so if you haven't done the segmentation, if you don't know what your customer journey is, what about your data? If your data is not in order, you have to get your data in order to feed it into the CS tool. So if your data, like usually there's some sort of CRM that you're working off of, right? And so is it clean there? And do you collect, the information about your customer there? What about the behavior that your customer is exhibiting that you should be measuring in that customer journey? Now, there are some CS tools that will help with some of that, but you have to at least be collecting it in a database somewhere like Snowflake or something. It has to be housed somewhere. It's not going to be housed in your CS tool. Your CS tool can expose it to you in the way that's going to work best for you, but it can't house it. And then there are other people who have proprietary databases that don't even interface very well with these things. So you want to have, ask those questions first, get those things in place, figure out if you can do an API or if you're going to do an Excel upload or what are those things going to be. Is your data clean? Does it actually represent what your customers, who they are and what they're doing, what products they have, how they're using your tools? If you have those building blocks, the sort of foundations of your CS data in place, you can get a CS tool and get it installed and start using it pretty quickly. It's all those other things that take up the time. And you can, if you don't do those things ahead of time, you'll just pay for a CS tool while you do it. So, yeah.
Well, this is great. And I know that you're working with one specific client right now. And one of the things that we talked about, and this is a bit of a left turn, but we talked a lot about the recent hiring process that you went through. And
all I've been doing is hiring.
Yeah.
I'm also trying to hire my replacement. I just want to make that clear.
Well, yeah, let's get into that. I think the structure of the way that you work with these companies is interesting. So if you wouldn't mind elaborating on that, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, so basically, when we go into work as interim leaders, we try, they usually have some sort of job description out there and they're, trying to hire for the role already. So I don't necessarily have to get too involved in that, but sometimes we'll go ahead and check the JD and say, give them advice on that. Mm-hmm. But then usually while we're sort of waiting to, for the process to start for the VP, then I'll start to assess what's happening with, the current CS program and that sort of thing. In this case, like the job that I did last summer and fall, we didn't have to hire the CS team. Like the CS team was in place, but we had to reorganize the CS team to do completely different activities where they were trying to do, sort of a high touch CSM model, but their economics were very low touch and throwing more bodies at it wasn't going to work. Right. So we helped them redesign their program so that it would be largely more digital, but with pooled CSMs that then could intervene, so that once we had sort of that customer journey to understand kind of where their customers were staying on track or getting off track, then we would have ways for the CSMs to intervene when they were getting off track. We also found too that while they had a strong onboarding program, they didn't have an adoption program. And what was happening was they would get onboarded and then they sort of like get thrown over the fence from onboarding to the CSM. And so basically, we were working on what that adoption program looked like and how you built up, and that was more hands-on. And then let's see, what do I mean by high touch points, but the economics are low touch? So that's sort of like when you're a high touch CSM, you are working directly with your customer, and that is like a human to human sort of interaction. If it's low touch, usually there's a lot more digital that's in place where you have one to many, where there might be more webinars or more emails or more things happening in app, and there's only occasional touch points with humans. And that's what I was talking about more like with the intervention, and when your customers are getting off track, to make certain that you were intervening at those points. Or if you're trying to do upselling to them, there would be a certain group of customers where you're sort of sending out emails to saying, hey, it looks like you could use our product more efficiently. You should try to use this other aspect of it, and then have like a call to action in it, a CTA, to then reach out to the customers about it.
The high extreme end of high touch would be like, you might actually be traveling to meet with your client.
Now that the pandemic is maybe lifting, you might do things actually in person, not on Zoom.
Right.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's how things used to be, right?
Right.
So yeah, so that sort of thing. Sorry to exclude that as an example. But anyway, and so then, but really what needed to happen in this case with the group that I was interim with right now is they just had too low of a CSM to account ratio. They had a 1 to 100 account ratio, when at most it should be 1 to 50. And there might be, as they start to go more up market with enterprise and that sort of thing, that we might change it. We might customize what sort of, CSMs are focusing on enterprise versus the mid-market. And we might handle the SMB in a more digital way. But right now, they have been ignored for so long that we have a lot of adoption that we need to do. And we don't have the tools yet, any of the CS tools. And so we're trying to do some things that are more one-on-one with our customers. And then we'll eventually kind of get a more digital program in place and have other tools and like customer education that can be in-app, or videos, or articles, things like that. There's a lot of articles right now, but we don't have the other ways of, which is why we were talking to Minerva as well, because there are ways that you can show your customer very easily how to do things in your app without being on a Zoom call with them. And that can just be while they're trying to use your app.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I do want to get into your experience of hiring, because I think that in 2022 and in this kind of like quasi post-pandemic world, it does feel like the role of the CSM, or the different positions within a CS team, are evolving. And so would love to just
yeah. So I think it's important to know kind of what the role is, and that you have that well defined, so that you can communicate to someone and really set expectations on that level. But I also feel that in this sort of period of the Great Resignation, or whatever you want to call it, people have other names for it now, but when you think about it, you have to make certain that this is a mutual decision, that people really understand. You should be transparent, and people really understand what they're getting into, and that it really meets what those expectations are. Because if you tell them, hey, it's all pretty, there's nothing wrong, like, first of all, that doesn't exist in any business today, but also, like, then they come in and they're like, whoa, wait a minute, you said everything was pristine and perfect. This is not pristine and perfect. I saw a spot over there. It's like, look, okay, so acknowledge where you're at. In this case, this company is Series B. That's a very messy place to be. You're building every process, you're building it. And, it's like, see something, say something, do something, build that process. It's like, every day it's like, well, wait a minute, what's the process for this? It's like, maybe we have a guru card on it. And if we discover we don't, it's like, okay, then let's figure out what that process should be. And at the end of when we figure this out, go create the guru card on it, share it with the team in our Slack channel, make certain that they know that this is the process, because now we have one, and I constantly say to the team that we're building the plane as we fly it. Now, this is fine if that's what somebody is expecting to walk into. It's probably not the best experience for someone who's never done it before. Some people do it that way, but for most people, it just needs to be a match. Like, if you already know that that's what you're looking for, that you like creating order out of chaos, not exactly chaos, but you know what I mean? Like, there's disorder and you're going to create order to it. If that's what you like doing, this is a good place for you. If you don't like doing that, don't go there. Just don't, because otherwise 2 months later, you're going to be miserable and looking for another job. And then the company has to go and do that whole search again after they've already spent all this investment in trying to onboard you again. anyway, this is a long way of basically saying that the first thing I do is I say, this is where we're at, and I make certain that we're transparent. We have that conversation. Then I try to get an idea of what their skill set is. Are they thinking about, CS as a profession, or have they just been winging it? There's a lot of people out there who are just winging it. And that doesn't do you any favors. There's a lot you can learn. There's a lot of resources out there. Learn it. There's books you can read. There's people you can talk to. There's so many free things you can do online. You're not doing yourself any favors if you haven't prepared to do it and do it. And I'm not saying like it's as complex as like someone who's a chemist, but at the same time, there are things you can learn that will help your approach to it. And I've seen, even as I've been interviewing VP candidates, people who know their subject matter well, and we're in fintech payments for this particular company, but they've been winging it, and they couldn't tell me. I'm asking really basic questions. Tell me about how you've done customer segmentation. What do you do when you're building your customer journey? What do you do if you don't have the data you need for your customer journey? How do you scale a program? They can't answer basic questions like that. They can't help a Series B customer level up if they don't know those basic things. They're out. They're just out. So sorry. but like you can wing it maybe at a Series A. You might even be able to wing it at a company that's already well established, because you don't have to change as much. I think that's a mistake. I think everyone should always know their craft. But there's a lot of people out there winging it. I don't recommend it. You don't need to.
Right. There's someone's highlighting the book 7 Pillars of Customer Success.
Yep, I recommend that a lot. And Rachel says I recommend the Customer Success Professional's Handbook. I do, especially for someone who's a CSM or someone who's transitioning into CS. Yep. 7 Pillars is great because it works well to give the CSM a perspective. Like it has a lot of details, but it also, like how things work, but it gives you an overview. But also for someone aspiring to be a leader, it helps you work through kind of what the overall foundations are and then how you would actually execute on it. And so I think that's really great, because if you look at any of the books by Nick Mehta, lovely, wonderful person that he is, he's really writing to other executives about, hey, CEO, this is why you should have a CS program. And so that's why it's like, that's not a book that's really written for someone who's transitioning into CS. I basically tell them, put that down, you can read it another day. That's not going to tell you what you need to know yet. Yeah,
that's a great point. And then Donna Weber's new book, Onboarding Matters, gets shouted out.
Oh, yeah. Well, and so like, and I do a lot of that too with my teams, is like we read books together. And for the team that I was working with last summer and fall, we read Onboarding Matters together because basically that's where we needed to focus. We needed to look at how onboarding and adoption was taking place, or not really, and how we were going to build that. And that is absolutely fundamental to what you need to do in any program. Those first, like typically it's like the first 90 days, it can vary based upon the product and the customer base. But whatever, that first initial period when you're going through onboarding and adoption, that's critical. If you don't set the foundation for how you're going to work with the customer and how they should adopt and why they should adopt the product, and helping them through that humongous, like it's just the change management process. Anytime you're taking on a new product, you're changing your ways. Whether you had nothing before, because we're all using Google Sheets or something, we all figure out a way to do something, even if we don't have a product to do it, right? So you're changing your ways in some manner to use a new product. And so sometimes you have a customer who's coming from a different product and they have different expectations. And then you have someone coming to you who's not using a product. Those are two different experiences. Set yourself up, set them up correctly to have that change management experience. And also, change management isn't just about what steps you go through logically. It's that emotional connection. What's in it for me? Why do I care? What benefit will I get from it? It's that emotional connection that helps. And that's why I like what you guys are focusing on, Peter, at Minerva, in terms of the champion, because it's that champion initially that you have to connect to and help them see that vision.
Mm-hmm.
And in smaller ways with any of the end users, help them feel that way too. And it shouldn't be as complex for them, because as end users, it should be just something easy that they're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And if it is complex for your end users, well, then now you know that then you have more work cut out for you.
Right. But enabling your champions at your clients to then communicate to their end users is really key.
That's how you really get adoption in-house, right?
Absolutely.
If you have people within the company evangelizing and insisting that a product be used. And as soon as your champion leaves, that's why you have to have more than one champion at the company, because as soon as they leave, that's a red account. That's at risk.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. Happens so many times.
Yeah.
It's so easy to go over time, Jan. I feel like we keep talking for so long, but we do need to switch to our networking portion. And so for those who have been to these events before, we do it in a platform called Kumo Space. If you haven't been to the events before, then you'll just quickly need to create your Kumo Space account. I just dropped the link in to the chat, kumospace.com/Minerva community. We're all going to start transitioning over there. Kumo Space is basically a two-dimensional platform where you can move around and talk to different people. So it gives us a lot more freedom than breakout rooms or anything like that.
Before we do that, can I just mention, because we're going to talk about the weekly office hours.
Yeah, please do.
And for the weekly office hours, I was just going to say that really, it's very informal. It was because at some point I did a post about the jobs, and so many people reached out to me that this is when we were hiring all the CSMs and onboarding manager and everybody, that basically so many people reached out that I couldn't talk to everybody, and so we set up office hours, and it's very informal. We have a lot of different leaders who come by. We're going to have Ajame is going to come by once. Just whatever. Brian Hansen leads some things. I'm trying to think of. There's also Jeff. What is his name? Excuse me.
Jeff Frizzoco.
No, there's another Jeff. But anyway, his last name starts with an H. I'm the worst with names.
Jeff.
Anyway, we'll announce these things. They come along. But anyway, they're just it's informal. And it's really just meant for people to ask more questions and dig in and geek out a bit. So yes, we do it once a week on Tuesdays.
How can people find your office hours?
Yeah, if they just DM me, I'll add them to it. It's informal. There's no invite except for a Google invite.
Cool. So people can find you on LinkedIn.
All right. So we're going over to Kumo Space.
Let's go to Kumo Space. Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
I'll just drop the link again there. We'd love to see everyone there, and we'll end the Zoom in about 2 minutes.
All right.
This is really cool.